At a time when the world was weary of war, wary of its neighbors, and fearful that a lasting peace was beyond reach. At this fragile crossroads in human history, the awesome potential of nuclear power burst upon the scene.
Well, there's an old saying that you never have a second chance to make a first impression. And that's about what happened back in August of 1945 when President Truman authorized the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima with atomic bombs.
It's a certain tragedy that nuclear energy was introduced to mankind in form of an explosion. However, that's a history.
The Second World War came to a dramatic close. Recent allies, the United States and the Soviet Union, now dedicated themselves to seeking every possible political and technological advantage over the other. The Cold War had begun. So had the race for atomic power.
That Cold War just kept pushing everybody. And as that happened, I believe, then we began to see some results.
The Atomic Energy Commission was created in 1946 to control atomic weapons production and to test atomic energy applications for civilian use.
10 years later, President Eisenhower foresaw the value of atomic power, and he proposed a program called Atoms for Peace.
And one of the principal driving objectives was to see, could we control this nuclear explosion so it happened a lot slower and use it to generate hot water and turn turbines and make electricity.
The AEC needed a home for the many experiments and tests that lay ahead. In 1949, they found an ideal location for the nuclear reactor testing station 29 miles west of Idaho Falls, on a piece of land that once had accommodated the naval proving grounds. Here could be found the available power, abundant water, and isolation that the station would need. There were also nearby communities that could grow with the site.
Idaho Falls fought for it in a major way, and so they were thrilled when the AEC came and called Idaho Falls their headquarters town.
Not only did it bring jobs, it brought scientific opportunities, which you did not find very often.
They saw the opportunity for breaking into the growing technological framework of the country.
As the western outpost of Chicago University's Argonne National Laboratory, the testing station began filling out its team. But while Idaho provided the perfect backdrop for nuclear experimentation, it was a desert. And in the eyes of many Easterners entertaining the thought of joining the testing station team, Idaho looked barren and unappealing.
I was hesitant at first because my wife was from South Carolina and she was used to anything but the desert. But I took her some pictures of the nice cultivated grounds around here and convinced her to come.
First impression we got, of course, we got up here in the dead of winter, of course, in January, and took a look at that snow pile high up on the windows and everything. Again, my wife was ready to go home.
In the end, it wasn't the snow or the desert, but the nation's call to be part of scientific history that was just too tempting to resist.
Most scientists, if they're worth their salt, can't leave the experiment alone. And so what happened, here's 52 reactors being built on the NRTS, and here are scientists who are not going to sit by the telephone. Here they come.
It was a great time to be involved with new science. The nuclear industry was just in its infant stages, really.
The terrific number of engineers and physicists and chemists that made their homes here, the high level of achievement that took place here, and the excellence with which science was conducted. This was world class.
Level of personnel from a standpoint of technological and scientific background made a good impact on the educational system in the city and eventually in the state.
I can't imagine how many hundreds of people took advantage of the education program from the site, and it probably increased the education level of this area by 200 or 300%.
Given the means and freedom to pursue their goals, the testing station's impressive blend of local and relocated intellect set about its mission. They tested theories, challenged conventional thought, and aggressively tore down obstacles.
I can remember Warren and I are telling the staff one day, we can do anything that we want to as long as we intend to. The first day that we do something we didn't intend to do, we're going to have so much egg on our face we'll probably never recover.
An American nuclear industry, nuclear power industry, had to be pretty darn close to perfect. A serious accident at a new power plant would jeopardize the possible future of this industry.
The boss's orders were protect the people, so we did our best to protect the people. We monitored everywhere, both the reactor itself and in the laboratories where they worked with the radioactive material. With my little cutie pie and my GM meters, I did a pretty doggone job of protecting myself and the people I was working with.
Well, I remember a tour that I took through the facility, and after, the gentleman had an instrument that actually measured radioactivity and showed us that there was more radioactivity in our watch than actually existed as we went through the entire tour.
Radiation demanded respect. The power generated by splitting atoms inspired nothing less than awe.
One could make the power go from essentially zero to several thousand megawatts, which is something in the neighborhood of the power generation of the Grand Coulee Dam at that time. This would all take place in a matter of a fraction of a second.
You're a little bit nervous because it's never been tested before. You know, you think you've got it right, but until it's really been tested, you're a little bit nervous about it.
Nobody had done the things that we were doing here before. No one elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in the world.
We couldn't go to somebody else and say, what's your experience? They didn't have any experience.
Instruments that we needed, many of them had not been built yet. And we had to conceive of them, design them, then persuade the government that it was good to fund this. Then we had to build them, test them, and finally use them.
The National Reactor Testing Station had a broad base of customers who wanted their reactor designs and materials tested. Each, of course, also had its own agenda. Various branches of the military were among the most hopeful participants.
The interest of the Air Force was in atomic power to propel an aircraft that would be able to fly very fast and remain aloft for days at a time. The Army also, I might add, had interest in nuclear power. They wanted to do any number of things with small nuclear power plants. Could you have a nuclear power plant that was so small that you could actually make it portable? The interest of the Navy was in submarine propulsion. The real birth of the nuclear Navy, the demonstration that nuclear power could propel a submarine, was really proven here.
The National Reactor Testing Station felt constant pressure to produce results. During the Cold War years, the Soviet threat hung over the nation like a storm cloud ready to burst at any moment. And yet, as they pieced together homemade instruments and wrestled monstrous equations with their mighty slide rules, site employees were having a great time.
It was fun to go to work every day for 20 years. Not too many people can say that.
Scientists or engineers were allowed to design experiments or apparatus or equipment, and we went to the laboratory with the technicians to help build that equipment, and we tested it, and then we installed it in the reactors, and we helped collect the data from the experiments in the reactors and analyze that data.
No wonder they all report how great it was to come to work.
In a month's time, You could start from an idea to a finished product, which in today's environment takes years and volumes to do anything like that.
NRTS scientists enjoyed amazing freedom. Nowhere else were experimenters free to detonate explosions or risk meltdowns to test their theories. Almost overnight, the site was blazing an atomic trail that the world was destined to follow. The Atomic Energy Commission put together the NRTS assignment lists. Atop those lists was always the challenge to create an almost mythical machine.
One of the highest priorities was always a breeder reactor.
That could provide essentially limitless energy.
Use up fuel on the one hand, but create fuel to take its place on the other.
Actually producing more fuel than it consumed. It was this concept that was explored initially by EBR-1.
There were many firsts associated with EBR-1. One was the first reactor in the world to produce useful electricity from nuclear power, and it was a fast breeder reactor.
Not all of the firsts at EBR-1 were planned. Sometimes, first-of-their-kind experiences arose from more spontaneous events.
At one point, there was a miscommunication between the scientist running the test and the actual operator that was doing the controls, and EBR-1's core melted. From that, we learned how to change the way the core was built so that you couldn't get into that unstable area anymore.
But the extension of EBR-1 to try to bring it into the commercial realm was EBR-2.
Since the AEC was counting on the NRTS to develop guidelines for licensing commercial facilities, the list of tests to be performed was extensive.
The EBR-2 reactor was subjected to a loss of flow, and the reactor shut itself off. The reactor was subject to a loss of its ability to reject decay heat, and the reactor shut itself off. The reactor was subject to control rod excursions, and again, the reactor limited the power before damage could occur. The EBR-2 test demonstrated that with the proper design, reactors could be developed that would inherently protect themselves.
What followed was an amazing body of work performed at a remarkable pace in an unprecedented number of nuclear test facilities.
We've built and tested 52 different reactors here, and those include all kinds, all sizes, all types of tests.
52 reactors is a lot of reactors, and no one else can come close to that. This really represents the focus and the foundation for what took place in nuclear power development throughout the world.
In 1952, the materials testing reactor was completed. The MTR subjected materials proposed for use in new reactors to intense radiation tests. It was important that the NRTS base its recommendations on measurements derived from actual observations. Otherwise, nuclear power's future would be founded on speculation, not facts. Borax, the boiling water reactor experiments, were designed to provide that experiential data.
And they built a Borax-1 to find out what happens when they just drive that harder than they should and cause a steam explosion and blow up.
And blow it did, sending up a geyser-like plume from the desert floor.
A reactivity accident could be something analogous to driving a car and the accelerator pedal goes to the floor at the same time that the foot can't find the brake. And so there gets to be a very sharp increase in the power of the reactor. And the increase in power causes the fuel in it to heat up very rapidly.
Borax demonstrated that power excursions and coolant tests could be safely conducted in controlled environments. But it was Borax-3 that made the headlines. With help from Utah Power and Light, Argonne scientists used their boiling water reactor to provide electric power to the city of Arco, Idaho on July 17, 1955. Data was now being gathered in droves. Still, for every answer the scientists obtained, several new questions arose. As experimenters dug down through the layers of atomic secrets, both their confidence and their curiosity grew. After their early experiences, one thing they knew for sure:
that it was possible to do experiments that would simulate certain aspects of the worst imaginable accidents that could happen. And because of this, a fairly large program was started in reactor safety.
SPERT, S-P-E-R-T, was an acronym for the Special Power Excursion Reactor Tests. The purpose was to do increasingly severe accident simulations and see how the reactor responded. Started out with SPERT 1, which was a simple open pool reactor.
It was just a little hole in the ground backed by, I think, steel, and I don't even think it was stainless, just steel. And it had water in it, and then a core in it, and it had a tin shed over it. That was SPERT 1. It was not very impressive.
Some people associated accidents in reactors with atomic bombs, and that is not possible. In fact, in the SPERT program, it took quite a while to figure out how to get to the point where one could conduct a destructive test. And one of these we did make the reactor blow up, as you will see.
From the control center, observers first saw the column of water rose to a height of about 80 feet. Clearly shown is the forceful impact of the water column on the upper bridge structure.
Kind of looked like Old Faithful. Really, if I can think of a simile, that's the best one I can think of. It actually bent the beams in the building.
They were showing that even if you do get this sharp increase in power that might occur when a control rod is ejected, that the fuel heats up, and as it heats up, it expands, and that's the same thing as turning off the gas and putting a brake on, and it just automatically shuts down.
Another important safety initiative was LOFT, the loss of fluid test.
LOFT, this was the crown jewel of nuclear safety experiments in the world.
The LOFT test was done very successfully with a consortium of international partners, and it established the data by which the modeling could be developed to aid in the design and the protection of all of the reactors around the world.
They needed to actually know what would happen with a pipe break, and so the LOFT project was conceived and built and successfully tested.
It was especially important when one of these accidents actually did happen with 3 Mile Island.
Really, we learned a great deal, far more from our accidents than we do from just day-to-day operations. 3 Mile Island was a nightmare for public relations. It was a gold mine for technical folk.
And the information that had been developed in the LOFT test contributed greatly to the understanding of what had happened at 3 Mile Island, how to recover, and how to protect the fleet of reactors going forward.
I believe that we can look the citizens of the world in the eye and say that you and your children are safe from the consequences of any nuclear power accident, so long as you follow the pathway that we laid out, the codes.
Many of the pathways the NRTS made available to the nuclear power industry were provided as codes, equations of sorts that help put many of the testing station's findings into practical applications.
I'd like to be able to say, all right, I've got a reactor with certain design parameters. It has this kind of fuel. It is this big. It is operating in this kind of a pressure and flow environment. Get all of that down on paper in a way that the first time you push the button to run the reactor, you know exactly what's going to happen.
We had a code that would tell us how fast the water was going from an emergency cooling system was going to come in. We had a code that would tell us how fast the pressure came down in the reactor to where the water would boil.
The experiments that were done in Idaho were, made a very significant contribution to the credibility of nuclear codes that were used in the licensing of reactors.
It's important to remember that the NRTS was performing much of its most challenging work without the help of technology we enjoy today.
There were no computers as we know them today, or fax machines, or personal computers, or any of those things. They didn't exist. Everything was done with pencil and a notepad, all the calculations.
I really saw technology change a great deal. We started out on manual typewriters, and from manual typewriters we went to selectric typewriters where you had the little element that you interchanged.
And the room full of computer that we had in the early 1960s was about 1/100th as powerful as the computer that you can hold in your hand and keep your personal agenda on in these days.
Requests for NRTS results flooded in from other countries. But as Kurt Hare recalls, Warren Nyer had a ready response for those requests.
We don't have time to write up results reports for all of the specific needs. If you really want to find out what we're doing and get the benefit of our results, send one of your people here for a year. And needless to say, those countries, they pick the smart ones. So we had the cream of the crop coming in to work for us for a year or more, and then we're able to take away and take back to their countries the results of this experimental program that we were running.
Virtually every developed country in the world had experiments at EBR2. They had people on site at EBR2.
And because of the visitors who were here, we did contribute to a lot of the knowledge to construction of reactors around the world.
The business of nuclear power was serious, stressful work. Still, site workers loved their jobs.
It was fun.
And it was that way for 30 years. It was fun to go to the site because it was exciting.
Even as a layperson, you really felt part of what was going on, you know, and really committed, you know, to trying to help and do your part and be there and, you know, do the best work you could.
But even the most conscientious planning and painstaking precautions can't protect against human error. On January 3, 1961, NRTS alarms sounded. Emergency response teams were dispatched to the site of a U.S. Army experiment.
Stationary low-power reactor number 1, called the SL1, had blown up and killed 3 servicemen who were operating it at the time.
They believe an operator pulled the control rod out rapidly, and at that time that particular core could go critical on one rod.
Produced a steam explosion, heated up the water that was in the reactor, the water turned to steam.
And it made a water hammer, and it pushed that water up with such force. There were control rods sticking in the roof of the building.
We did some tests with a control rod, and it appeared to us that it was sort of casually lifted. It wasn't lifted as far and as fast as you could move it, but to this day we still don't know the reason for it.
The SL1 incident was a rare blemish on nuclear power's impressive safety record. Safety is just one of many reasons that NRTS employees look back on their careers with great pride.
We did the job. We did it safely, we did it within budget, and we did it on time.
And that was an exciting thing to feel that we had contributed something to the world.
The daily life of people out here was to prove that you could do something by doing it.
And now it's time to do it again. The Cold War may be over, but there are new problems. Not the least, and perhaps the most important, is the need to develop new sources of energy to feed the world's growing appetite.
To my way of thinking, the whole business of world peace hinges on making everybody into a have instead of a have-not. That requires, in this day and age, abundant energy, clean energy.
Oil was created over a period of hundreds of millions of years, and the world is essentially consuming most of it in 200 years. So we're consuming it about 1 million times as fast as it was formed, and we're not converting phytoplankton and zooplankton and dead fish bodies into petroleum anymore. By the end of the century, we are likely to be down to the last 10% of both petroleum and maybe less for natural gas. And since fossil energy represents 86% of our primary energy,
we want to be less dependent on foreign oil and gas, and that's a national security issue as well as an economic issue. Our energy consumption is on the order of 300 to 350 gigajoules per capita. Compare that to the world average, which is 67. What we want to do is bring all those people up.
The good news is we have nuclear energy to bring us out of this dilemma. Certainly will make many countries, including the United States, energy independent. And from an environmental point of view, it has no production of CO2 or other enhanced greenhouse gases.
We believe that new nuclear plants can be built and be cost effective and cheaper than any other form of electric energy that can be relied upon.
As the inevitable end of fossil fuels draws closer, Idaho is being called upon once again to help shape the future of atomic energy.
We hope that this new laboratory, the Idaho National Laboratory, will be able to attract the immense talent going forward that it attracted in the very beginning.
And now it's going to be made a national lab. They'll get you name it. They're going to get problems that have been facing the nation and plants everywhere for a long time. And I don't question that they're going to solve them too.